Okay, so every speaker has a bias, and I'm going to confess my bias up front. So my bias is pretty blatant. I want everybody on the West Coast to be able to take care of each other. And that is citizen-led. That's us being able to take care of each other after a large natural disaster that affects us regionally, such as an earthquake, or now as we're experiencing a pandemic for the entire world. And I've got a specific bias that is my approach to community preparedness is not looking at it through fear, but looking at it through a lens of love. The lens in which we approach this subject makes all the difference in the world. So I love what I've learned about MPC Ready so far. I've created a presentation today specifically to address some of the larger items that Lynn and I have been talking about. And then at the end, we'll open it up for Q&A. As you have questions throughout the talk, please just pop them into the chat. I won't see them until the end because I've gone full screen, but you can stick them in there. So here's the three topics for today. We're going to talk about volunteers, both recruiting additional volunteers and retaining volunteers. We're going to talk about sponsors and partners. These are other organizations that MPC Ready can engage with in order to go further. And then the Holy Grail, how do we inspire others to actual action? How do we get them to not just give platitudes to that earthquake zone, a wildfire evacuation zone, and that we're dealing with a worldwide pandemic, but to actually go that next step and act. Within these categories, COVID will definitely come up, but it won't be very focused between those three types of disasters specific to our region, the West Coast. So I told you a little bit of my background. I tech marketing as a software evangelist. I'm an entrepreneur. This fall, I'll be launching my 9th organization since leaving Microsoft. So I'm a bit of a startup geek. And as you heard Tom and I talking, I'm also an urban homesteader and permaculture geek. I love growing vegetables and talking about growing vegetables. That actually was part of what initiated my book called Prepared Neighborhoods. Becoming an urban homesteader, the next logical step is getting prepared both for yourself and for your immediate neighbors. And really, I felt this was nothing new. This was literally the conversations that I would have with my grandfather. It seemed to skip my parents' generation, but it was definitely there just one generation previously that this isn't strange. This is normal life of growing and preparing food, preserving it, reaching out to neighbors, and thinking about group resilience. So the book is just turned 3 years old. On its first birthday, it thankfully and unexpectedly got picked up by FEMA, and they invited me to fly out to their training symposium run every other year. They fly in all their emergency managers, a whole bunch of Homeland Security folks, and then straight military folks come as well. So 2 directors at FEMA had both read my book independently. They literally had an impromptu conversation and said, you know, we don't focus on the neighborhood. FEMA focuses federal, regional, state, and large metropolitan area, and then they stop. And at the point that they stop is where they started to find that they were falling down. My book goes the opposite. It goes from individual to family to group resilience of direct neighbors to when you take a set of neighborhoods together, now that creates a city. And to me, the neighborhood is the sweet spot where it's large enough that you can have group resilience projects. It's small enough that it's manageable without too much politics. So I got to go and present to several thousand folks in the room. I was warned by some FEMA insiders to not say things like looking at this through a lens of love and not fear, that I'd get yanked off the stage. I'm not very good at following directions, so I did it anyway. And everybody in the audience started nodding their heads. So it was about a third Homeland Security, a third military, a third emergency managers, and they all got it. That fear is not what really motivates folks. For true long-term action, it's love, it's community building. So the other thing that comes up in the Prepared Neighborhoods book is to document the story of how we started Bainbridge Prepares. I'm currently listed as the founder and board chair. Lauren is our executive director. I think I would be considered an active board chair. When the pandemic hit, we got pulled back in. People here talk about duos in leadership, and Lauren and I had a good experience of me sitting in the emergency operating center with the fire chief 6 feet this way, the police chief 6 feet that way, and Lauren out in the community running amok, showing the face of calm to our grocery stores, our pharmacies, and all of our various social agencies. And it worked well. So to set the stage, we're on the same page. This is FEMA's whole community doctrine. 3 years ago, this quote from the current director at that time: "Nothing is more important than to train people within the whole community ready to execute our collective mission." I was working on Bainbridge Prepares since 2011. So for this to come out, for FEMA to come out a few years ago, embracing that same approach was pretty helpful. I'm going to share a quick timeline of our NGO, our non-government organization. It's called Bainbridge Prepares. What you see in the upper right-hand side is kind of a physical representation of it. That's Deputy Chief Jared Moravec from our fire department. We have a fire district that is completely separate than the municipality. They are independent organizations. In the middle is Ann Lesage. She's our emergency management coordinator. We stole her from your state. We got her from University of California, Irvine. She is about twice the size of our island, population-wise, and has a nuclear power plant, which we do not have. So this was a little bit like moving to Mayberry for her. And then the third leg of this three-way partnership that we call Bainbridge Prepares is our community-led, citizen-led nonprofit. What you see over on the left side of your screen is our current set of teams. And I'll go through a little bit of the background behind those. And then what you see at the bottom is for long-term partners, Puget Sound Energy. That's our large regional electric company, along with our mascot there, Ready Raccoon. So this is how we organize our teams. And I want you to understand this in order to better understand how we can apply this to MPC Ready and how you all can continue your growth as well. So there's quite a bit of horse trading between these teams. There is, if one team starts out on the city side and it doesn't work for a year, we take a look at that and we might move it over to the community nonprofit, and vice versa. So there's also a rotation of who is the lead agency for a particular group. If one grant that does not want to give to, say, a fire department, we can rotate the city in front of it or the community nonprofit in front of it. Note in that lower left-hand corner that there is this is version 4.4. That means that there was 44, this is the 44th version of this organization over the years. The other thing to note is that we've divided these into preparedness teams, folks that are working ahead of a natural disaster, and then there's response teams, folks that are activated when the disaster actually hits. That's an important distinction. In fact, let me advance to the next slide here. We actually have documented what that looks like of pre-disaster, everything we do on the left-hand side in the green, and then what the disaster strikes, and then what do our teams, how do they activate afterwards? We can come back to this if there's questions at the end. So our first topic of volunteers, of how we're going to be recruiting and training. There's a sales maxim that I use in the marketing team using ABC. It's kind of a classic for NGOs like Bainbridge Prepares and MPC Ready. let's always be recruiting, because um, uh, volunteer fatigue is a real thing. Life changes, people move. And so something that Lauren and myself, that Lynn from your team, we are just always recruiting. Now, I want to go through a handful of best practices that we've developed over the years. The first is to recruit high impact volunteers. Now, what I mean by that is, if you recruit an executive director of a nonprofit that happens to share a same focus with you. So I'll stay on the gardening theme that Tom and I were geeking out on. We have a local agency here called Friends of the Farms. They're a nonprofit. They represent all of our professional and semi-professional farmers. They are the public face for that, run by a dynamic woman named Heather Berger. We have a I wanted to have a food resilience team. Naturally, I went and I recruited Heather Berger, because by getting Heather, I not only get Heather herself and her significant brain power, but she is a high impact volunteer, because as an executive director of her own nonprofit, I automatically inherit her staff, her board, her volunteer base, her email and newsletter list, all by just recruiting a single person. So as MPC Ready continues its growth, consider that when you identify a need for a specific focus of a team, think about who is already showing leadership in this in our region. Example of a high impact volunteer relates to our disaster hubs. So the map that you see here, this is our island. The right side of our island, a ferry heads over to Seattle, 35-minute boat ride. The left side of our island has a bridge that goes out to the Olympic Peninsula, and it's a pretty old bridge. And it's got our trunk line of all of our communications go underneath that, are stapled to the underneath side of that bridge. We know that that bridge will go down in any decent sized earthquake, so that we do all of our planning as such. We have a concept called disaster hubs, which is where folks are going to naturally walk towards, gravitate towards, whether we want them to or not, after a large natural disaster like an earthquake. They're big open spaces where people are going to go looking for information or help. So what we've done is we have recruited each of those organizations, those locations, to say, folks are probably not going to ask permission to show up. They are just going to show up. An example you see at the top of the map is called Bloedel Reserve. It's our botanical gardens. It's drop dead gorgeous. I'd encourage you to look them up later this afternoon. Beautiful spot. And if you come visit Bainbridge Island, it's going to be one of your top 3 places to visit. Bloedel has the benefit of having huge, wide open pastures and fields. People are going to naturally go there after an earthquake. So we recruited them. We said, we would love to have you all and be able to equip you ahead of time. That, again, we not only got the staff and the executive director of the Bloedel Reserve on board, but now we also get to reach into their donor base for appeals, their newsletter list to recruit people for our classes, and so on. So high impact volunteers is the first example. One last example on this poster is our senior center. So our island, we're an island of 25,000 people. We tend to skew older. This is a favored retirement community. And we see that in our volunteer base as well. We see that out of our CERT teams. We see that out of our own core crew that Lauren runs. And the senior center, we have a number of elder care facilities and various retirement facilities, but the senior center is the social hub of it. It's where the table tennis tournaments happen. It's where all fun stuff happens there. By recruiting them, we were able to reach into all of those access and functional needs type communities, whether it's skewing older or skewing other types of functional needs, through their one positive community. So we also recruit seasonally. So this Victory Gardens campaign is something we just launched in the spring. As Tom and I were geeking out, now is the time, the last few months, when people have been putting seeds in the ground. It's a shot in the arm of positive news when most news is not positive. And it's a way to rally people around something that naturally they do anyway, which is the growing and consuming of foodstuffs together. What you see in the upper right-hand corner is an example of, we have a strong local theater called Bainbridge Performing Arts, BPA. We did a partnership with them to create a knockoff of the Prairie Home Companion. We call it the Bainbridge Stay at Home Companion. It's a podcast that gets pushed out each week. That's a project that was COVID inspired, and hopefully will probably last past the pandemic. It probably has legs to keep going on a seasonal basis. We also recruit impact volunteers based off of subject matter. So what you see down there in the lower right-hand side is a Resilience in a Box logo. That is from the US Chamber of Commerce. So that's all of the Chamber of Commerces around the country, all report up to the federal one. They've got a program called Resilience in a Box. It's a good example of, we don't necessarily need to recreate the wheel from scratch. We can take a federal program like this and push it out locally to the business community. Last example of seasonality. One of our more complicated teams is called our child safety team. If you see on the bottom of this brochure here, all of those logos there, this is an example of basically every child-facing organization on the island. We pulled the leaders of those folks onto a single team and gave them the strategy of figure out a 24/7 plan for what do we do with our kids when a large natural disaster happens. And that team worked together, and they bring out messaging like this, like a family unification plan. And then this gets promoted heavily every back to school season. And out of that comes a new set of volunteers. This is also an example of recruiting a high impact volunteer. The woman who has run this team for years, her name is Kari Murphy. She runs the Girl Scout for all of Western Washington. It's tens of thousands of girls are in her scouting program. She's brilliant, and guess what? She happens to live on this island. So of course we went and recruited her. And by recruiting her, we've inherited not only her brain power, but a huge network of additional folks. Okay, second topic. And again, if you have questions on volunteers, retention, and recruiting, pop them into the chat, and then in a few minutes, we'll go through all those questions in detail. So for sponsors and volunteers, the Bainbridge Prepares Partnership is a three-way partnership. It has not always been this way. We started out and it was citizens only. Now, within the first year, Fire District came on board and joined us in a very significant way. They've been a solid partner from day one. And so within your targets, of course, there's City of Menlo Park and the local fire protection district. That, in my mind, is the best approach to fulfill FEMA's whole community doctrine, you, in essence, need those three on board before you can really scale. But it does not mean that you need to wait. I am not a fan of waiting on red tape or politics. I'm more of a fan of asking for forgiveness later if you need to. So while the fire department was with us since year one, since 2011, we had several miscues, misstarts with the city. In fact, we didn't really get the city on board until about 3 years ago with a woman named Amber Richards, who was our part-time emergency coordinator at the time. But a word of warning is, even when you do get your strategic partners on board, your job is not done. We had numerous roadblocks, even once we got the city on board, including not the current communications director, but the previous had a bee in her bonnet, and she did not like my friend Amber, who was our emergency manager coordinator at the time. And I think it was just a case of professional jealousy. But when the communications director for the city doesn't like your project, not a lot happens. So that took a good 18 months to work around that roadblock. Thankfully now, the communications director at the city, Kristen Drew, is a dream. She's an amazing person who clearly gets what we're doing. So we're currently enjoying a nice upswing. In fact, the photo you see in the upper right-hand corner there, a very generous check from Rotary, the woman on the left, that's Amber Richards. That's the previous version of Ann, who is now, she's the director of civil service over in Spokane. She went from a town of 25,000 people to a town of 250,000 people. So she's a rock star. So this is an example of a different type of strategic partner that MPC Ready can go after. And these are service organizations that can give you umbrella coverage, as well as financial check. So as you see in that check for $53,000 and change, that was a large sum of money that went straight from our Rotary Club to one of our top service organizations on the island. Directly to buy mass casualty medical kits that we've now stashed at all of those disaster hubs that you saw from the previous map. Rotary has also been a consistent partner supplying people power. So whether it's our team or whether it's Rotarians, we've got, when we need to call upon an army of credentialed folks, we've got them there for us. I already mentioned the Puget Sound Energy. That's an interesting one because it's been a two-part phase. At first, it was PSC came to the board sponsoring some of one of our main annual events that we do each fall, 3 days of preparedness. They have since, though, turned us over to a separate organization, the PSC Foundation, separate organization, not a utility, but a nonprofit. And they have given us several grants over the years that have paid for generators. Which has been for our disaster hubs, which has been neat. Two other logos that are worth mentioning there. Sustainable Bainbridge, that's how I started this organization 8-9 years ago. It was a program of Sustainable Bainbridge. I joined that board. It's a local sustainability-minded nonprofit. I looked around for what project from this working board was not being covered. There's nothing happening in the neighborhoods. So to me, with my perm background, and then leading to urban homesteading and leading to preparedness, community-minded preparedness, that struck for me the need for prepared neighborhoods. So Sustainable Bainbridge gave us that coverage, everything from an email newsletter database that we could instantly tap into to kind of a brand halo, because, yes, go ahead, Lynn.
Oh, I don't think I spoke, but Scott, your audio is breaking up. I don't know if you can fix something on your end.
How about that? Is that better if I hold the microphone like this?
It's actually probably your internet connection. If you're hardwired into your internet and not going off of Wi-Fi.
Yes, I am connected via Ethernet, but I am on an island which gets generally lousy.
Maybe turn off your video. Someone's suggesting that you turn off your video. I'll try to turn your video off. Here we go.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Can you do that?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, let's see if that helps. And you guys can still see the slides?
Maybe you have to turn your own off.
Yeah, we can see the slides.
Hey, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Lovely. And
No slides.
no slides. Let's see if I can reshare my screen. Hold on just a second. Okay, let me know if you see my screen.
Your screen is good, Scott.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so to confirm, no video, but you can see the strategic partner slide.
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, let's get back on track. And Lynn, my Zoom crashed, so I think I probably lost the questions in the chat to date. So if you still have yours and you could copy paste them towards the end of our session, that would be great. So the last item mentioned on this is Kitsap Community Foundation. Bainbridge Repairs was a nebulous entity for years. We didn't get a physical sponsor to borrow their 501c3 until maybe 3 or 4 years ago, because frankly, we didn't need a bank account. Whenever we would do items, we would either find a direct sponsor or I would just write a check myself. And it wasn't until we had folks that wanted to start donating cash to us that we needed to set up a bank account. And when we did that, we went after a physical sponsorship. Kitsap, we're in Community Foundation refers to Kitsap County, our county that we're in, which also is for ability. So 2 quick types of sponsors and partners to mention as you all are thinking about expanding yours. Our library system has been an outstanding partner since day one, hosting our classes. They've been a terrific partner. And then Parks and Rec, the photo you see up in the upper right-hand corner is every summer our Parks and Rec does a big music festival. It's perfect timing to promote the annual event that we have in September, which is just 2 months after the summer festival, and they do a great job of giving us promotional time straight from the stage. The 2 icons you see at the bottom are the logos, Island Volunteer Caregivers, we call that IVC, and Helpline House, which is our full service social work agency where my wife worked for years. Those are our straight line into access and functional needs or vulnerable population. And so that's an example of another high impact volunteer team to recruit from so that you've got your experts in that field running those individual teams. This slide represents some of the joint ventures we've done. So as I mentioned, Friends of the Farms earlier is our local farming entity. There was a piece of land that was given to the city. They bequeathed it to Friends of Farms, and it had some very specific parameters on how it could be used. One of the uses is a food forest, a large educational focused location where we can be growing food and teaching others how to grow food on their front porches, their side yard, their back pasture, wherever it might be. That's been a fun joint venture specifically with our food resilience team. Barn is our local makerspace. It's full of 3D printing materials and fabric arts experts and woodworking and metal bending. And we were very lucky to have a makerspace like Barn. And that partnership, that strategic venture is brand new. That came related to COVID, and it was first start out with sewing of masks. Very quickly, they put a small army of sewing folks on that project. And then we got into their technical arts team, which does fabrication with 3D printers and all kinds of other fun projects. And that is the team that is still going strong. Even as we scale our other teams down related to COVID, that one is continuing to work. And then already mentioned the fun Prairie Home Companion knockoff that our theater did. So last topic, and then we'll go into some Q&A, is getting people to actually do the work. So one, we want to get them to attend a class, and then we want to get them to actually do what that class is about. For instance, make a go bag. And then third, we want to then get them involved in the core team of volunteers to help that system replicate. So as we do that, we've got some best practices that we've developed over the years. We've done plenty of experiments that have not worked and can steer you away from those. And then a few things that have worked well. So this image, this ACT image, is something that I use as a marketing professional, I use this all the time. I used to teach MBA students for 7 years in their main marketing class, and this was a core with the marketing communications. At any given point, your audience, whether it's the audience for a newsletter, or it's the audience who's physically sitting in a class or attending it via Zoom, that audience you can only move them forward one step at a time on this graphic. So if you've got a group of folks that are aware that they live in an earthquake zone, really for that class or for that message, that brochure, whatever the messaging piece might be, you can really just move them forward one step to understanding. And in any given audience, you have folks across the spectrum. You've got people that might show up or read a brochure or look at a poster that are unaware they even live in an earthquake zone or a wildfire evacuation zone. Then you've got people at the other end who they not only understand it, they believe it, they've internalized it in their core, and they're ready to act. So we want to be able to pull people from one step to the other, no matter what stage they're at. And this is I tend to pull this up once a quarter and compare it to our outbound messaging, and to make sure that we are putting positive hooks that we can bring people forward through these stages. Unaware is they have no idea any of the natural disasters in their area. Aware is that they understand it, but it's really at an arm's length understanding, very hands off. When they move from aware to understand, they get it that they live where they live has natural disasters, but it hasn't really been internalized yet. It's gone from general awareness, but you've cut through that clutter to the point where they can say, yes, I do understand this. To move from understand to believe is where they start to bring it internally. What I've noticed over the years is the best indication of this is the email newsletter list size. Your email newsletter list is folks who have gotten from understanding to believing. And then to move to the final, our holy grail, our desire of what we really want our fellow citizens to do is to actually act. That is something that's tangible. That is, they create a go bag and they send you a photo of it. That is, they go through a credentialing program. They join the CERT team. So to set an example, for our 25,000 person town, my guess is that for unaware, we've still probably got about 10,000 people, which is a shockingly high number of people. But if you walk in their shoes for a bit, think about how they live. These are folks that are living paycheck to paycheck. They have got little brain power left over after their long hours at the job, beyond thinking of paying the bills that week or that month. And they're tired. They just don't have the effort, the energy to put into that. The next category of aware, I'm guessing that probably out of our 25,000 people, we're about 10,000 folks are aware. That they're aware they live in an earthquake zone. They're aware that wildfires are happening increasingly every summer. For understanding, my best guess for our specific scenario for a 25,000 person town is that's probably about 3,500 folks. Within that group, we've got about true believers of about maybe 1,200, 1,300 or so. That's basically the size of our email newsletter list, and these are the folks that you see as regulars at our public meetings. You all probably are starting to see some of the same faces. And then for ACT, that's our 350 core group of volunteers. These are folks that are credentialed. They've had background checks. They've been trained in various things. That could be wilderness first responder trained for medical. It could be they're on our CERT team. And these folks, while they are in the email newsletter list, these are the ones that are actively showing up for the trainings. So while 350 people out of a town of 25,000 doesn't seem like a lot, we're actually one of the larger nonprofits on the island. And by leveraging the right partners like the city and the fire department and Friends of the Farm and Helpline House and more, we have a much longer reach than would typically be expected. So here's a quick example. This 2 Weeks Ready brochure was not created by us. It's a nifty little infographic. It's got the city of Bainbridge Island logo in the middle of it, but we didn't make this. This came from Washington State. And California has the same thing. There's both FEMA resources federally and California resources for the state for you all. And they have a set of glorious brochures and marketing communications pieces that they will give you. They'll give you the native art files. And then it's just finding someone who can pop in your logo and you're good to go. You've got a set of professional equipment there. There's also a bit of a social science for accountability and an inspiration to actually act. So it's been proven that if folks make a small but public commitment, so they put it on a Nextdoor post, they put it on a Facebook post, they just tell their friends and family about it. Social scientists tell us that those folks will actually stand a significantly higher chance of doing the work, of actually committing to that process. So we turned that into something that we've regularly used over the years of a 90-minute challenge. We tell folks, hey, take 15 minutes, put a post, make some kind of public commitment. It could be sending it to 5 friends. It could be putting it on Facebook or Nextdoor. It could be just simply telling your spouse, hey, I'm going to do X. And X might be having a neighborhood awareness party. It could be creating a go bag or get home bag or a shelter in place kit. And then take another 15 minutes and plan a party. This speaks to the group resilience. And I was thrilled when I was reviewing all the MPC Ready material. I was thrilled to see the focus on neighborhoods because that's the foundation where everything starts. And so taking 15 minutes to put together an email or to make a dozen phone calls to folks to say, let's get together, whether it's face-to-face post-pandemic or whether it's via Zoom now, but let's get together and talk about neighbors checking on neighbors after a large natural disaster. And then the third step of this is to take 60 minutes to really to have a meal with those people that you live with or your immediate neighbors or family that are within short distance of each other and create a family reunification plan, which is who's gonna go check on who and who's gonna stay put so that the other ones can find them. Those three things put together as a 90-minute challenge, if people do that, we have found overwhelmingly we can get them to the next steps of various other actual actions. A new program that we've just launched that was the brainchild of Lauren and Ann from the city is this I Am Bainbridge Prepared. So the organization is called Prepared. These stickers you see here, there'll be stickers and things for your home, your vehicle, your office, your retail storefront. When folks go through a specific number of steps, they'll then receive one of these stickers that they can put on there to show that they are part of that team, that are part of that crew that is taking positive action. So with that, there is a myriad of things that we could talk about deeper, like shelter in place kits and go bags and get home bags and all kinds of fun stuff. But I want to pause and open it up for Q&A. So let me hop over into open up the chat. And I'm going to stop sharing my slides. Okay, so since my Zoom crashed, I can see, just the first question I see is from Vicky. Are there any protocols for CERT responders with respect to COVID? Yes, and Lauren, I'll ask you to chime in here in a moment on this as well. We have two of our primary teams is CERT, which is about 100 folks. I think we're at upper 90s. And then our wilderness first responder trained folks, we call them the Beamers, the Bainbridge Island Emergency Medical Responders. Beamers have gone through a 2-week wilderness first responder training. And So of the two primary service teams that we have, it's Beamers that we've got related to COVID response rather than CERT. With CERT, we had CERT volunteers working at City Hall when we had it closed and it was the Operations Center. And they were receiving mask donations. We had put a call out early on to the community to everybody raid your shelter-in-place kits and your go bags, pull out those N95s and bring them to City Hall so that we can redistribute them to first responders. CERT folks were doing that. So we had them in gloves, we had them in masks, and we had them wiping down items with sanitation wipes before they went into storage to then be redistributed. For protocols though, for our wilderness first responders, we've actually been having one of our team lead for that, Devin James, has been running a refresher class online the past few weeks, specifically focused on that, of making sure that our wolfers feel trained and able to respond if we have an earthquake right now while we're dealing with pandemic. Lauren, anything you want to add to that related to either our use of CERT or the Beamer team related to COVID? Oh, and I might need to unmute him or.
I think Lauren may have to drop off. He had mentioned something about internet issues.
Oh, probably because we're on the same island. Yes.
Scott, along with being a member of MPC Ready, I'm the president of ADAPT, which is the Atherton Emergency Response Team, a CERT organization.
Excellent.
And in conjunction, we were activated for an 81-day deployment for COVID. We're only one of 3 CERT organizations in Northern California to do so. So we adopted a combination of our own medical team, council, the chief of police, and FEMA formed our own regulations for face-to-face contact, because our goal was to, be in contact with folks, and that worked out because people got isolated and got forgotten. So yeah, there are protocols that are available, and sometimes you have to work with your local overarching agencies, in our case, the police department, FEMA, and our medical team, to come up with the right kind of safety for your teams in the field.
Yeah, we've done something similar. So Devin, our team lead for the Beamer team, is also in our fire department. He's one of our volunteer fighters. So it's another example of it really helps to have this partnership with the fire district, because we get access to these very brilliant and highly trained, credentialed people to come in and they make it appropriate for our levels, for citizen levels, but it's good to have those best practices. Okay, so I'm gonna jump back over into the chat from MJ. What were some of the things that didn't work? Oh gosh, MJ, how much time do you have? Because I have nine years of stories. Let's see, some things that didn't work. Well, business continuity was one of the things that did not work. Business continuity, to make sure we're all on the same page, is encouraging organizations, whether they're for-profit businesses or nonprofit businesses or faith-based organizations, to create a disaster plan ahead of time. It doesn't need to be complex. It can be as simple as a one-pager, but it describes what the responsibility is of the employees, the staff, the volunteers, should the earthquake happen when they are there at the facility, or if it happens in the middle of the night, what is expected of them the next morning. For years, we tried to get business continuity to be owned by our local Chamber of Commerce and our local downtown association, and it just didn't work. One silver lining of the pandemic is both those organizations are now heavily engaged with us. So it will be a good silver lining coming out of the pandemic, because we had tried every other way to get their attention, and it just wasn't high enough priority for them.
Scott, I just want to briefly say, we have a new employee at the fire district who's on the call. One of the chat questions had to do with that. So I'd like to introduce him whenever would be a good moment, since the last question pertained to that.
Yes, let's do it now.
Yeah, so I'd like Andres, would you please come forward and introduce yourself to the group? Thank you.
So hello, everybody. My name is Andres Acevedo. Just started with the fire district 2 weeks ago. And my focus is working on getting the CERT program kind of back on its feet and running and getting the training going even within the COVID-19 world that we're in now. So right now, I'm mostly just kind of listening and learning and trying to learn the lay of the land around here. Scott, if you didn't know, we've got, I think, MPC Ready is working in Menlo Park, but we've got 4 distinct kind of communities here in the district: Atherton, East Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and some unincorporated county as well. So enjoying your talk, and I'm just going to be here and listening and learning.
Thank you.
Andre, it's great to meet you. I'm so well. One, welcome to your fire team there. Sure, you'll be a great addition. And 2, thank you for working on the CERT program. And I'll give an open invitation to you. We regularly get together, our leadership team, in normal times once a month for a specific strategic meeting. And you would be welcome to sit in via audio on any of those calls. We usually meet at Station 21, one of our newly rehabbed stations. And you'd be welcome to sit in as a fly on the wall. Or if you like, I can connect you directly with Deputy Chief Moravec, and you guys could have a 15-minute overview.
I'd love that. And if you can just send the information through Lynn, she can get it to me.
Yes, that sounds great. Lynn, maybe you can introduce Andre and I via email, and we'll run from there.
That'll work.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so let me jump back over into the chat and find the next question. Okay, so from Chuck, what do you think of messages that are not fear-based but are negative? As one example, I'm not going to be a burden to anyone. Yes, that's a great question. I'm a big believer that language matters. Now, part of that is because I'm a marketing dork in my day jobs, and we are all about the importance of language. But whenever you anchor somebody with a negative word like burden, like this phrase, I'm not going to be a burden to anyone. What we're really doing is telling our own brains, even if we say I'm not going to be a burden, by using that word, we've just told our brains you're a burden. So we'll even just do little things like go through our communications every quarter or so to make sure that we are not, that we're using the positive version of the word rather than the negative. It's a small, simple thing. And frankly, we still make mistakes all the time because we've got a variety of folks writing copy for us in various methods. But that's an example of a small but really helpful thing to do. So next question is from Patty. Why doesn't Bainbridge break down the long list of kit items into small steps, starting with either the most important or the easiest? We do, Patty, in our classes, and frankly, the #1 feedback that I've gotten from my book, from giving talks about it all over the country, is some folks skip ahead and they go straight to the appendix. There's a few appendices. One's on how to build a get home bag to get you home from your workplace or your place of volunteer one last time. One is on how to create a go bag, which is your evacuation for wildfire. And then one is on how to create a shelter in place list appropriate for earthquake or pandemic. That shelter in place list is daunting. And for folks that skip ahead, they skip over the part where we tell folks, do not buy a single thing on this shelter in place list checklist until you have had your neighborhood meeting. Because post-disaster, it is all about group resilience. The solo survivalism is a myth, and it just frankly does not work. Group resilience is where it's at. We want to be creating meals together post earthquake. We want to be doing sanitation in order to keep ourselves healthy and sharing resources for that. So when you look at the shelter in place list, it's humongously long, but every household does not need to have that. It's more of in small in small groups. And we encourage folks to do the bags or to do the acquisition of those kits in the order of get home, then go, then shelter in place, because they're supersets, right? Your get home bag becomes part of your go bag. Your go bag becomes part of your shelter in place kit list. And it also lets people enter into it in the easiest. Okay, another question came in from Maria. You mentioned you tried recruiting volunteers from back to school for collaboration. Have you tried colleges? So no, we're not a college town. Our closest college is off island. It's about 30 minutes away. It's called the Olympic College. We do have programs that we have done with them, but that's been as we've taken on a goal of getting our entire county, replicating the Bainbridge Repairs model throughout our entire county. We're the only island in our county. We're going to be the least accessible, the most difficult to get to post-natural disaster because the bridge will go down. So it's a little bit selfish for us to get the other towns in the county ready, but also I'm interested in it from a societal standpoint of what does it look like when you have a network, a set of towns all networked together within a county, which is pretty close to the Menlo Park model since you all are pretty spread out. So while we haven't had a specific college recruitment strategy, if you guys have colleges in your area, I would put that, that would easily be in my top 5 to go after. Okay, any other questions that I might have missed before my Zoom crashed?
I have one that popped up for me. I'll just share it here because I'm unmuted. So one of the things I'm noticing, having lived in the Bay Area and also, left and moved back a few times, is, it's fairly transient here. And, as someone who's previously worked in tech, yourself and myself included, I find that the people who generate the wealth in this area, generally speaking, they do it in the digital realm. And so there is less of a connection to land and community, even though that's actually what gave rise to the wealth in the first place. And so I'm curious, because you're in a much different situation there on an island. How do we go about shifting culture a little bit to be more in connection with the land and community, especially when you look at something like the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, which has over $5 billion in its coffers, and it's kind of just sitting there and not being super effective.
Yeah, that's a terrific question. So we've had the advantage because we are an island, because we've got clearly defined lines, and because we know that both the ferry terminal will be damaged and the bridge will go down, we will be a true island post-earthquake. But really, if you look at any major area, earthquake is going to create such elevation change on the highways. It's going to take down bridges. If you look at basically all of the areas, all up and down from California to Vancouver, BC, will become a series of islands, even major metropolitan areas. So some towns like Portland, which is a city built on bridges, there are bridges everywhere in Portland. Every single one of those will be damaged. They become a series of literal islands. Other areas, like your area in California, because of the elevation change that you'll see on the highways, all of a sudden, it's quite literally impossible to get any kind of vehicle traffic from one side of Menlo Park area to the other. So getting folks to understand that they will become a series of disconnected islands, so to speak, is a good first step. The second step of connecting folks to the land and getting them just out of their digital heads is anything that can be done that brings people into small downtown areas, anything that connects them to the land physically, like farming. The Victory Gardens campaign, I would encourage you all to consider that as well. And those types of things that are based, say, like at a public community library, where people are celebrating the fact that they chose to live in Menlo Park for a reason, right? There's a reason that they no longer live in Oakland, or that they've moved out of San Francisco. They've come to your region because they are attracted to that specific area and that specific type of land and type of folks for a reason. So it's reminding them of that reason. Okay, let me look back over on there's a couple more questions that have come in through the chat. From Patty, she says, tell us more about your volunteer organization. Does Bainbridge have ACT volunteers who are not CERT trained, e.g. Neighborhood or less fully trained neighborhood coordinators or block captains, as well as CERT volunteers? And if so, how are these actions coordinated? Yes, so we have, I think we're at like 22 separate teams. CERT is only one of them. That org chart that I showed you all, in fact, many of the things that I showed you all today are available on the Bainbridge Prepares website. So if you go to bainbridgeprepares.org, you'll find the appendices of my book, which, by the way, you don't need to buy the book. You can go to your local library and ask for a copy. Visit the local bookstores that you have there in the region, and they can order it. And then worst case scenario, look at Amazon. But the org chart that you'll find on bainbridgeprepares.org that shows all the different teams, you'll notice only one of them is CERT. A number of the other teams have different types of training. So for instance, our Medical Reserve Corps team, it's where we have stocked all of our doctors and nurses and EMTs and the medically minded people who are certified. MRC is the acronym for that. And MRC is something that is certified at the state level. So folks go in and doctors and nurses and such go in, register themselves. It's not too painful. At least for Washington State, it's maybe a 10-minute process. And they're just simply uploading who they are and their credentials. And from that, you can very quickly create a Medical Reserve Corps that Fire District will be super interested in knowing about, that they've got all the, we were astounded when we started to create that team. First, it grew by leaps and bounds. I think it started with a core team of about 5. Once we made the first announcement, it immediately went to 60. Like literally in one weekend, 60 doctors and nurses and such showing up, and then has continued to grow. So look at that org chart to see other teams that we've got. And then on the Bainbridge Prepares website, you can click through and read a description of each of those teams. And you can also see who the team leads are, and it says their emails. So frankly, I don't need to be in the way. If you all have the desire to start a specific type of team and you see that we've already done it, look there, read the description, and contact my team leads direct. Just tell them that you listened to Scott ramble about Bainbridge Prepares, and they can share best practices. Okay, next question. From Chuck, if you get if you get resistance from official partners, do you go political? So, Chuck, I am apolitical. It is one of my least favorite things in the world, and yet I somehow have started a nonprofit that has me attached to City Hall. I have no idea how I got myself into this. Frankly, this was one of the reasons why I brought Lauren. Specifically, I recruited a dynamic duo of an executive director and a program director, because I was getting burned out dealing with the politics at City Hall. Thankfully, one of the partners, Fire District, has approximately 0 politics in it. It's a breath of fresh air to hang out with the Fire District folks. They're all straight shooters and there's no politics involved. With the city, because we have a city council and then we have a city manager, and that is always interesting when you've got a bunch of elected council members and then an appointed city manager. That has been interesting to say the least. Those are most of the roadblocks that we've experienced the last 9 years, or excuse me, the last 3 years when the city's been involved, have been political in nature, and not really a way around it, other than, again, to find a champion within that organization and ask them for help. Okay, so next question. From Steve Russell, Bainbridge Island is easily imagined by residents as a community, even potentially isolated. Menlo Park as a region is fragmented into many self-identities. What advice about community action given that? That's really interesting. So Steve, I would say that that's most closely related to what our current work the past year and a half has been of extending our NGO model out to the rest of our county. So our towns within our county all have very different personalities. We've got Bremerton, which is right on the water, and it's got a huge naval shipyard, and it's got Bangor, which is the largest nuclear submarine base in the world, I think. So it has a very different vibe than, say, one of our smaller towns like Kingston, which we just helped launch last year, which is a lovely little town, kind of classic Pacific Northwest town, very different than a military town. So what we're finding is, as we try to replicate ourselves in each of those, is to allow each of them to have their own personality. So Kingston is does their own thing. It's got their own separate branding. They can take some of our best practices and they modify them for the size of their town. They're smaller. And so that's the first aspect, is create a unique look and feel. They can be considered sister organizations, but create a unique look and feel for each town. The second would be find the version of me and Lynn in each of those towns. There's going to be some rebel rouser personality, somebody who likes to start something from scratch and doesn't take no for an answer and doesn't mind making end runs around roadblocks. You need that person in every town. And then as you grow the overall Menlo Park area, what that starts to look like is each of those rebel rousers in each of those areas getting together once a week, once a month to compare notes and share resources. So for instance, the digital communications can all be shared, but the live face-to-face events might need to be separate, more regional. Okay, from MJ. What are your suggestions for resolving conflict between chief volunteers, relieving problem volunteers, responsibility volunteer, burnout, et cetera? That's the least favorite part of my job in the for-profit world is when you have to let somebody go. And it's doubly my least favorite part when it's one of your volunteers. The way I think about it is this. If a person is becoming a problem, if a volunteer is becoming a problem, they're not happy. And I want to help them get to a place where they're going to be happier. And the first step to help them get to a place where they're going to be happier is that they no longer are working with Bainbridge Prepares. And so my first set of thinking down that path is to get to know them as best I can so that I can either, one, change things so that they are happy within the Bainbridge Prepares volunteer team. And we've done that several times where this person is not working out for team A, so let's switch them over to team B. Totally different focus, different set of personalities. But there are some times when they just are not fitting in at all. And then it's figuring out what else is their passions in life and encouraging them to go that direction, a different type of volunteer service. And then every once in a while, you've got a volunteer that is such a problem that you have to, in essence, fire them. That's a miserable job. It probably has to be done by the head person. Lynn is going to cringe inside, but it probably has to be done by the thought leader or the general organizer, which is probably somebody along the lines of Lynn. And that's never a fun response, or that's never a fun conversation, but it's a bit like ripping off the Band-Aid fast, is do it and shoot straight and be honest, and then just set a firm, healthy boundary. And So the other aspect of your question, MJ, is about resolving conflict between volunteers. That happens frequently. My first step is to look at is everybody staying in their area of expertise? If somebody is jumping ship out of and talking about something that's not their expertise, I'll just call them on it. I'll just say, listen, I hear your point of concern, but you are trying to give pandemic advice to our Medical Reserve Corps, which has got a bunch of medical doctors and epidemiologists and registered nurses on it. And you need to stop doing that because you're not medically trained. So, and then a lot of times it's taking one or both people aside separately and having one-on-one conversations to encourage them to get along better. Okay, next question from Vicky. I live in a neighboring town to Menlo Park. Organizing our divisions, we also run into privacy concerns. Oh goodness, yes. Did you encounter this and any techniques to overcome this? Our preparedness and certs are under Woodside Fire Protection District. So yes, there is a software company that has gone open source. You can find them at recovers.org. Gabby, you might in particular, if you're a fellow geek like me, be super interested in this crew. So recovers.org, they're based out of San Francisco. I hired them years ago, flew them up here, and we were their first proactive town that was a client, their first town that hadn't just gotten hit by a tsunami or a landslide or a flood. This has since gone open source, so anybody can use it. It's continually being worked on and improved. It saved us during the first few months of COVID. It's basically a matchmaking service for somebody has needs, somebody else has excess supply of something, and recovers.org helps us make those matches. Now, when we did our installation, this was 6 or 7 years ago, we had tied it to our Map Your Neighborhood program. Map Your Neighborhood, by the way, you can find that on the Neighborhoods tab on BainbridgePrepares.org. It's a Washington State program. It's got some great materials that you all might be able to leverage, including, or in particular, a flip chart that you keep underneath your bed. So when your brain's full of adrenaline, you've got it right there. I like the program, in fact, so much that I befriended the creator of it, and she ended up as the editor of my book, Dr. Luann Johnson. She's brilliant.
I'm sorry, what was that page again, please?
Say that one more time.
What was that page again, please?
If you go to BainbridgePrepares.org and click on the Neighborhoods tab.
Thank you.
Yep. So the Map Your Neighborhood program materials are outstanding. So we tied the Recovers effort to Map Your Neighborhood, and we thought it was going to be a great idea that we would let the neighborhood captains all be able to record their stuff into this database. There was several sets of credentials. So you could say, a citizen could say, I'm okay with my neighborhood captain knowing my information, like the names of my kids or the age of my parent that lives with me. But I'm not okay with the fire chief knowing, or vice versa. I'm okay with the fire chief knowing everything about us, but I don't really want my direct neighbors knowing some of the specifics. And recovers.org is set up to do that. So, but we ran into so many privacy concerns, mostly because this island is very tech. About half the island, or probably more, works at either Microsoft, Amazon, Starbucks, or Adobe. We're a bunch of geeks up here. So we did run through probably at least a year's worth of trying to figure out the privacy issues, and Recovers helped us solve most of those. Okay, so question from Steve Russell. We talked about fire. I wonder, especially given recent events, how do we involve police to build love, not fear? Part of the problem may be the fire police division of roles and especially budgets. Yes, that's a terrific question, Steve. So everything that I've said so far, where I've said this, the partner of the city, that includes our officers. So for Bainbridge Island, the police department is part of the city, whereas the fire district is a separate entity. So We're very tight with the police. We do joint programs. One of our officers, Sergeant Trevor Zimba, is highly trained in hostage negotiations, and so he teaches a verbal de-escalation class for us, which is outstanding to have an officer teach the same things, the same tips and tricks that they use for de-escalating any situation. I joke with folks that I use this at the dinner table. This isn't just for out in the community. This is for your own folks you live with. So we're fairly tight with the police in terms of training. Our flotilla, because we are on an island, we've got a flotilla. That team is co-led by our harbor master, who is a police officer, Tammy, along with Ben, who runs one of our tourist sailing boats. So we've got multiple ties to police. They've also been good consultants. So for our child safety team, we wanted to have a set program in place, or not a program, a procedure in place for post-earthquake. We created a plan where we telescope all the kids on day 3 from their individual schools into one school that is then rechristened the Family Reunification Center. That way, all the parents and guardians know when they get back on the island eventually, whether that's a week later or 2 weeks later, that they walk to one place and they know their child is going to be there. To get the kids from point A to point B, from their original schools to this final location, the police were able to give us best practices on how to do escorts of walking minors from one place to another, and do so in a way that is safe and responsible. So we thankfully, our police department 15 years ago was a mess, and it was a disgrace, and it was embarrassing. And thankfully, those bad actors, which went all the way up the chain, have been weeded out. So we are very lucky. We're super lucky to count our police officers as true peace officers. And I recognize just how incredibly lucky we are to be able to say that. We're about as opposite of Minnesota as you can get.
I think we have time for 2 more questions, and I know Kathleen had one in the chat, and then I see Maria's hands up.
Great. All right. So we'll start with Kathleen's question, then we'll go to Maria. So Kathleen says, when we organized our neighborhood, Stanford Oaks, not long after Katrina, disaster prep was high priority. Interest wanes, yes, until the next event. Yes, that is an issue. In fact, I see it with my book as well. My book sales spike 6 weeks after, when I see the reports from Amazon after every natural disaster in the United States. It's a very strange phenomenon. We see the same thing with the island, with Bainbridge Prepares. That's why some of those programs that I showed you, like the joint venture with Friends of the Farm to do the Bainbridge Food Forest, which when it's complete, it will be the largest food forest in the US. So it'll be 17 acres. Projects like that where we're in good times, nobody's gotten hit by a tsunami recently, right? We're not in the middle of a worldwide pandemic. Those more good times projects can be used to grab folks' attention and to go after kind of some of the natural human tendencies of the importance of gathering around food, whether it's the production of food, preserving it, or enjoying it together. So I see Maria doesn't actually have a question. So if there is anything else, let me know. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to Lynn.
Well, Scott, I thank you so much. And in terms of you've just given us a wonderful presentation here today and pointers to resources and offers of help. And after the meeting, I will introduce you and Andres. And we would also like to know if we could have your slides. People are asking about that. So
yes, for sure.
Okay.
Yep, so, I'll distill them as a PDF and send it to you, and you can post it as needed.
Okay, so I had some slides that I'll skip today, but I do want to just show our upcoming meetings, and maybe at our last meeting, we took a pledge to Scott's point about breaking readiness into doable parts, to go ahead and prepare a community emergency communication, a family meeting and communication plan. I thought today we could take a pledge to do something related to what Scott talked about. Let me first show our upcoming meetings. Let me just share our screen. So I want to invite it. So Scott has given a lot of ideas, and we don't have time today to start breaking those down into further action. But I am holding a meeting Wednesday, July 8th. I'm calling it Outreach Recruitment Support Committee. Anyone interested in talking more about what we heard today toward tangible action, please join me that day. You can send me an email and I will send the link to you. And then we have our CCM Advisory Board, which is, I think, evolving its role, meeting next week. Our volunteer leadership meeting, that's for the area and neighborhood coordinators and anyone interested in organizing a neighborhood. And then our MPC Ready community meeting. These are always the fourth Saturday of every month.
Lynn, could you send that out to us?